Hello, welcome back to the channel and welcome to the outro show, the show about shows, right here on the writer Albert Lanier channel. I, of course, am the writer Albert Lanier. And of course, another episode of Outro. This time, talking about a show that was released, and you can go and check it out. It's called The Aloonae Show, and it's a podcast based in the UK. So it marks the first time that I've actually done media outside of the US. I've been interviewed on talk shows, podcast, radio shows, little bit of cable access TV or whatever, since 2009, and it's all been kind of domestic. I don't think I've done anything outside of the U.S., um, any part of the U.S. So this is the first time I've done a show certainly based outside of the U.S. and anywhere outside of America. So it was actually a pretty good show, pretty good podcast. It's only about, I'd say, 30 minutes or close to 30 minutes long. And you can find it on Spotify. Um, and the title, I believe, is Media Conspiracies or something along that line. I believe it's season 18, episode 3. So I believe those are, if I recall correctly. But I know Media Conspiracies is the title of it, which I didn't care for. I mostly talked about the Danny Casolaro and the Octopus and Inslaw and Promise, which as anyone who's caught my previous episode of Outro and is aware of my background knows that I have a background in terms of having researched that in the past, back in 2010. In fact, I was interviewed on a show called Media Monarchy, where I first talked about Casolaro and the Octopus and Inslaw Promise and all of those. I don't want to say cast of characters, but I'll just use that term. And if you're interested in taking a look, or listening to that interview, you can go to, I think, Media Monarchy's website and check that out, or Internet Archive, which has the interview up there. It's been there for over a decade or so. So you can check that out. But anyway, getting back to the Aloonae show, like I said, it's a shorter episode compared to other episodes of podcasts that I'm on. I'm usually on for an hour or more. I think the most time I've ever spent being interviewed on a show was about 3 hours. So that's the I haven't broken that yet. I haven't. That's the most time I've spent being interviewed on a show. So this was about 30 minutes or close to it, maybe 28 minutes. I can't remember the exact time. And again, we talked mostly about Inslaw, Promise, Danny Casolaro, to a certain extent, to a minor extent, the Octopus. And of course, that has been in relation to the recent Netflix docu-series called American Conspiracy, the Octopus Murders, which some people watching this may be familiar with or know if you do get to look at this episode. Again, if you check out my previous episode of Outro, I also was on a show discussing Casolaro, Octopus, Inslaw, Promise, all of that. I believe the Ocelli effect. So being on this podcast was kind of interesting insofar as it's shorter than most of the other episodes of talk shows and podcasts and radio shows that I do. But also, I was given kind of sort of like a runway. I was kind of given chance to speak and say what I kind of needed to say. Because one of the things I would tell anybody is when you're booked on shows, when you're booked on any kind of a podcast, radio show, any kind of a show, it'll vary as to how hosts are. Host will, be different kinds of hosts, and they'll have their different kind of style. Because when you go on shows, you're not dealing necessarily with professional broadcasters. Some shows you go on, they may be professional radio people or professional former TV people or something, but most of the time, when you're dealing with people, they're just average Joes or average Jills or average people who just have a podcast or radio show or some kind of program. And so that's very different because sometimes those individuals, they're not seasoned interviewers. In the case of this host, I think he wisely sort of asked very few questions and allowed me more than enough time to answer. So it was a very good show, very good podcast in that regard. He didn't get in the way. Those are the sort of, and that's generally a good host, generally effective host when you're being interviewed, because some hosts kind of step on things. They kind of they get somebody on their show, and then they kind of want to chime in and ask a question and chime in and do it. And that of course can work. I mean, it really depends on the flow of the show, right? What's the conversational flow? If you want a certain kind of flow that's shorter, punchier, sharper, that's one thing. But if you want something that's longer, then it's going to be very different. So this was, again, very satisfying for me in terms of being interviewed because, like I said, with the whole concept of the runway, I had enough time to take off, get up, take off from the runway and fly off in regards to my answers. So I had the time to talk. I had the time, even though it was only 30 minutes or so, I had the time to really answer questions. Not that I don't on other shows, I do. And in other shows, I give very long answers. But this one, the flow was pretty good, even though it's a short show. Like I said, it's about a half hour. It was a pretty good conversational flow. The question to answer ratio was good. There weren't a lot of questions, and the answers were of sufficient length as to be worth the time. Sometimes you go on a show and you're in the middle of an answer and somebody chimes in, or you give an answer and it's kind of wrapped up and you don't go as far as you feel you should. This was kind of, it was right in the, I think it was right in the middle. It wasn't too long. It wasn't too short. It was just about right on the show. So I really wasn't too familiar with this host's work in regards to, interviewing guests and so forth, but it worked out very well on the show. Again, it's the first time that I've done any kind of media that's based in the UK. And from what I understand, he's a student at a university in the UK. So it was interesting to go on the show. Again, I don't care for the title, which was like media conspiracies. I got asked a couple questions about X-Files for some reason, and a show that I really like called Nowhere Man. And so I got asked about those, and I got asked, I think, one or two other things. But I was mostly able to talk about Casolaro and the Octopus, and also talk about and mention my article, Long Tentacles of the Octopus, which can be found at albertlanier.substack.com. So, and also promote my new Substack, which is, of course, Final Cut, which is all about movies, which can be found at alanier.substack.com. Very slightly different. But so overall, I would say it was a good, solid booking for me. I enjoyed to the duration that it was, which is really about 30 minutes. I enjoyed it. I felt like I was able to kind of say what I needed to say on the show. And after talking about Danny and the Octopus and Inslaw and Promise, more recently because of that Netflix docuseries, I feel it was a kind of nice wrap up to that. Because now I'm focusing on my brand new Substack, which is a film Substack, like I mentioned, Final Cut. And so hopefully from now on, most of my bookings will be film oriented. That's what I'm hoping to do in the future, is to do, because I'm focused, I returned to film writing. And so, sorry, I returned to film writing. So I'm hoping to kind of just focusing on film and film-oriented stuff. But this was kind of a great way to kind of wrap up the whole Danny Casolaro and Octopus and Inslaw and Promise aspect because of the docuseries putting that out there. The Netflix docuseries putting that out there. So I had a very good time. I had a good time doing the show. Again, it's called the Aloonae Show. I think the title is Media Conspiracies. Title of the episode is Media Conspiracies. Go to Spotify. That's where you can check it out. That's the Aloonae Show. I think the Aloonae show. Aloonae Show. And that can be found on Spotify. I believe it's season 18, episode 3, if I'm not mistaken. But the title is Media Conspiracies, that I recall, because I just listened to it. Fortunately, I've just had some time off because I'm normally busy doing stuff like this, going on a show and then promoting it here and then elsewhere. But I had some time off. I've had about a week off the previous week and really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed it, I see we have someone in the chat. Thanks. Hello to you too. But that's been it for this episode of Outro, the show about shows, right here on the Writer Albert Lanier channel. If you're a host, by the way, if you are a host of a podcast, radio show, TV show, any kind of show, and you want me as a guest, let me know in the comments. Again, only for those who are hosts, of shows. Nobody else write stuff because it's going to be deleted for this episode. But if you're a host, you're interested, let me know. Also, if you're the host of a YouTube show or a podcast or radio show in the UK and you'd like to have me on as a guest, let me know in the comments section and maybe we'll set something up. Until next time, this has been Albert Lanier on the Writer Albert Lanier channel, finishing another episode of Outro, the show about shows. Goodbye, folks.